Basically, what I'm hearing is Chris and Jackie go into a room and they're fighting over a barrel, and Jackie's winning the fights right now. Is that what you're saying?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say, I mean, if it did come down to a physical battle, I would put my money on Jackie.
This is episode 201 of Bourbon Pursuit. I'm one of your hosts, Kenny, and let's go through a little bit of the news, but really the big news this week, and maybe you're living underneath a rock, you weren't looking at social media, you weren't looking at any of the news articles that came out, but Marianne Eaves, the master distiller at Castle & Key, the one that was renowned as being the first female master distiller since Prohibition, in a joint press release, has announced her resignation from the distillery with mixed emotions. In various news articles, she expresses that she isn't done yet being a master distiller and will continue to stay in the industry as a consultant. We recorded an episode back on, I think it was 18, back with Marianne. This was before Castle & Key, the name was even ever conceived, and it was being referred to as the former Old Taylor Distillery. So make sure you go and you check that out and kind of check out her past and her everything that she had built, because we had started this podcast pretty much the same exact time she was coming online with Castle & Key. So we wish Marianne all the best in her future opportunities and endeavors, and we look forward to having her back on the show once again. This didn't get much publicity, but I was a part of Media Day at Churchill Downs during Derby Week, and Fred, along with we got to hear Chris Morris and Elizabeth McCall talk about Woodford Batch Proof. And we didn't really know all the details about it, but come to find out, it's going to be a new product line extension and will only be released one time per year at the beginning of spring, which happens to be around Derby time. Of course, batch proof is somewhat like barrel proof, but not exactly. What they do is they have their standard offering of Woodford Reserve, and then every barrel is rinsed out with a gallon of water and added back into the batch. And most of us kind of know that, or we call it the devil's cut. So just a little tidbit of information. So if you're looking for a more higher proof version of Woodford, and it's going to be different every single year, go and check out Woodford Batch Proof. On our news, Pursuit Series episodes 10 and 11 are now on sale this week to our Patreon community at first. We've been talking about episode 10 for a while, and we're super excited to release it because this is a 5-year wheated bourbon coming from Finger Lakes Distilling. And this distillery is getting crazy good accolades. We featured them back on the Empire Rye episode, and they get good reviews from pretty much everywhere. Blake Reiber of Bourboner, as well as Aaron Goldfarb of Hacking Whiskey, sold out a barrel of their ice wine finished bourbon in 48 hours. Michael Veach recently reviewed their Mackenzie Bottled & Bond bourbon, and Breaking Bourbon even named that Bottled & Bond bourbon one of their best bourbons of 2018. And now we have the first ever barrel proof release at 5 years old. Episode 11 is right around the corner as well, and it's a short barrel. And who doesn't love short barrels? Only 112 bottles were in this barrel, and it is the second highest proof we have released thus far, coming in at 114.3. It's also 10 years old, so it's got that good middle of the road sort of age to it. As usual, first access is to our Patreon community, so make sure that you're checking out your emails to get your password for access. We're excited to have Campbell Brown back on the show. If you've been a longtime listener, you may have remembered him being a part of the Legend Series partnership that we have with the Kentucky Derby Museum, and that was back on episode 98. As the president of Old Forester, he oversees a lot of the brand's momentum and strategy. With anyone interested in a business background, this is one you're going to find entertaining. And with that, let's go hear from our good friend Joe at Barrel Bourbon, and then you've got Fred Minnick with Above the Char.
Hi, this is Joe from Barrel Craft Spirits. I work with a team that takes blending seriously. We spend months obsessing over hundreds of combinations until we figure out the perfect blend for you. Lift your spirits with Barrel Bourbon.
I'm Fred Minnick, and this is Above the Char. When I walked into the Brown-Forman office to interview Chris Morris, I sat down in a nice leather chair. The PR person's office was surrounded with fishing photos and family photos. It felt very friendly. And then in walked a young woman I had never met before. She was tall, blonde hair, very pretty, and she extended her hand and said, "Hi, I'm Marianne Eaves." I said, "Nice to meet you." Chris looked at me and said, "Marianne is our new master taster." Brown-Forman had just named Marianne to be the master taster of the Woodford Reserve brand. And I later learned that she was on a path to become the next master distiller for Woodford Reserve. Imagine that, being in your early 20s and having the opportunity to become the master distiller for one of the greatest bourbon brands on the market. Now, at the time, I thought to myself, I never met her. What does this young woman know? And despite my background in covering women and whiskey, writing the book Whiskey Women, I had only just met Marianne. I felt like Marianne needed to prove herself a little bit before I could officially think in my mind that she is capable of being a master distiller. And so I talked to her. And what I learned from her within 30 minutes was that she was one of the brightest young minds, not just in Kentucky, but in all of American whiskey. She could tell you everything there was to know about corn and how much starch to extract and how to distill it and what are the different distillation techniques to get whatever you need out of something. She was an engineer, and she chose to go into bourbon versus making ethanol or something else because bourbon was her passion. And when she announced her departure of Brown-Forman for a new distillery that would be starting up at the Old Taylor facility, which is actually near Woodford Reserve, I was kind of stunned because who, after all, would leave the opportunity to become the master distiller of Woodford Reserve? And then I got to know Marianne even more. She has that entrepreneurial spirit. She wanted to do her own thing. She wanted to be a part of something new. Well, this past week, Marianne announced her departure of Castle and Key. And it's a little bit of a historic one from an American whiskey perspective. You see, Marianne was the first woman to take the title Master Distiller at a Kentucky distillery. Now, don't get me wrong, there were women in the past who actually were doing Master Distiller work, but they did not take the title. And I think when you put the Master Distiller title on your card, you got a little bit of a target on your back. And after her departure, you saw that target getting pelted for Marianne. There were people who were making fun of her for her how she is on social media, saying things like, well, who will take selfies now at the distillery? There were people who were pointing out the fact that her bourbon had not yet hit the market. How can she call herself a master distiller? And I got to tell you, all of that disappointed me greatly. Because here was a young woman who took a risk and left one of the most comfortable positions you could possibly be in the distilling business. She took a risk for something new. It didn't work out. It happens to all of us. We don't know the reasons. It could be personal. It could be professional. There could have been conflict there. She may have not gotten along with her bosses. And who here has not been in a position where they were working for someone they couldn't stand? Maybe that's what it was, or maybe it was vice versa. I don't know. I don't know the reasons why Marianne left. But she did not deserve the vitriolic comments that she got from people on social media. Didn't deserve a single one of them. But I also know Marianne rises above all of it. Because at the end of the day, she's a very talented young woman, and she can do whatever she wants, to include being the first master distiller in Kentucky whiskey history. And that's this week's Above the Char. Hey, if you have an idea for Above the Char, hit me up on Twitter or Instagram at Fred Minnick. That's at Fred Minnick. Until next week, cheers.
Welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Pursuit, the official podcast of Bourbon. The whole team here today recording at the, I guess you could say maybe the Old Forester studio, something like that. We're actually in the Old Forester Distilling tasting room, actually seeing a pretty cool behind-the-scenes kitchen-esque cocktail mixing sort of area. But this is going to be a fun episode because our guest today was actually somebody that, unbeknownst to him, he was on the show before. From the Legend series that, of course, Fred hosted.
Right.
Hosted.
Yeah, the Kentucky Derby Museum Legend series. It's probably my favorite of the Legend series I've done, because Campbell's one of these guys that has been so instrumental, not just in bourbon, but all of spirits. And people will just hear, he's a member of the Brown family, and everyone thinks, he just gets things handed to him. This guy worked his way up, worked in foreign markets, did a lot of grunt work that a lot of people in bourbon royalty wouldn't do. And so he's one of those people I like bringing to the forefront and telling his story a little bit, because he's done a lot. He's done a lot to help people like us.
You say grunt work. I also know that at some point he was the SoCo ambassador at one point, right?
Yeah.
So that's a little grunt work.
The SoCo, by SoCo we mean Southern Comfort.
Yes.
And at one time that was a brilliant brand.
Oh yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And it helped. It was a part of the Brown-Forman family. Of course, they sold it to Sazerac, and I think we should ask him about what was that like for him, because he did have such an emotional connection to it. And of course, he's also
who came up with SoCo lime shots.
That's a big deal.
I'm not really interested in the lime shots, but you're always wanting to drink Fireball or Southern Comfort or something.
That's right up my alley.
Should we really? Should we have him on anymore, Kenny, with all this flavored whiskey stuff?
I don't know. I mean, you tell you what. Before we started recording, they offered us a drink, and Ryan kind of piqued his interest. So tell everybody what we're drinking as well. We got in front of us.
Well, so Jackie was in the cabinet, picking some selections for, and she said, "I have some President's Choice barrels." She kind of whispered to Campbell, and Campbell was like, "No," and I was like, "I heard that." So we'll take that.
We'll do the barrel proof version.
Much appreciated, Jackie. But as you can see, I think this episode will be a lot juicier than the Legend series, because we've been here boozing all day in the research lab.
Yeah,
just kidding.
Responsibly, we've been responsibly sipping.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce our guest. So today we have Campbell Brown. Campbell is the president and managing director of Old Forester for Brown-Forman. So Campbell, welcome to the show.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, we kind of gave you a little bit of a head start of what you did and growing up into here and doing some grunt work and kind of cutting your teeth in the industry. But I kind of want to take it back a little bit, because as some of our listeners may not know, you're from originally Montreal.
I was born here in Louisville.
And then moved to Montreal.
I moved to Montreal, and I turned 5 in Montreal. Yeah, and I grew up there.
Your Wikipedia research was wrong.
Come on. Yes.
We get it. All right, so somebody update the Wikipedia page before I have to. But I also want to give anybody that's from out of town, and Fred had already hinted at it too, of the name Brown and what that means to the city of Louisville, because you've got the Brown Hotel, you've got the Brown Theater. I mean, you've got a damn
the
food
Brown Cancer Center. You got the Brown.
You've got
all different Browns.
You've got the hot brown. You've got everything, right?
Yeah.
So kind of just talk about.
I kind of wish that one was ours.
But kind of talk about the Brown influence of just in Louisville, just for anybody that's listening that's across the nation.
Our family's been a part of this city. And for generations, even going back before George Garvin Brown, we've had family in Kentucky, and I think involved in the state from a political standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, philanthropic standpoint. It's our home. I think we're so proud that the city's been really quite good to our family and to this business. I was born here in '67. Kind of spent my early years here, but growing up in Montreal, it was all a little bit foreign. I remember, coming back here in the summers for a couple weeks and just remembering how incredibly hot it was.
Sweating your ass off.
Yeah. It was. I was like, wow, that's a new heat that we don't get up in Canada much. And then. Farms. Everyone had a farm, and so we would go out to my grandmother's farm, or her, an uncle, and you just see these animals that you just don't see in Westmount in Montreal, where we grew up, and then eating lima beans. Never really was into lima beans until I got here, and frankly, I don't think I've been into lima beans until about 10 years ago. I think that's really an acquired taste.
That's something I never thought we would start talking about. Lima beans.
The best lima beans is Pat's Steakhouse.
It does, yeah. I love Pat's.
The best.
Yeah.
Sorry, side note, Kenny. Get us back on track.
We expect a royalty check from Pat's after this.
Yes.
well, he's a cash operating business too, so that should.
Oh, he actually started taking credit cards. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, he finally bit the bullet.
Got audited.
Well, that'll do it. So yeah, I mean, look, Louisville's and Kentucky. Obviously, our family's been around here for a number of years and generations. I think. It's a great city. It's got a great attitude. I think it's an exciting time to be a part of this city. And I think, I like having a family here. My eldest child was born in Annapolis. My youngest was born here in Louisville. It's great raising a family here. It's, I like what's happening in the city, and I want to be a part of it. And I think most people that have been a part of this city for a lifetime, we talk about our high schools and where we went to school. I mean, I think there's a reason for that, is that we all have these great, really strong emotional connections that go back to childhood. And you've got people that come in and out of the city. I mean, I was out of here for 6 or 7 years, always knowing that I was going to be coming back in. So it's it's a unique place, and I think we've been fortunate that we got into the right business at the right time, and it's thrived for quite some time now, and gives us a chance to kind of enjoy being in an industry that's got so much to do with this city and the state.
And I'll add to a little bit of the Brown legacy. Campbell mentioned politics. They've had a lot of people in high places there. But to me, the Brown family is really about philanthropy. And if it was not for the Brown family, I mean, we wouldn't be talking about Whiskey Row today. I mean, they essentially saved Whiskey Row where we are right now. And when Louisville was crumbling from an art perspective, the Brown family kind of held it up. So you go around our museums here, and you'll see a Brown at the top of every one of the donors. So they're a very, very important family for our community.
Absolutely. So is there as Kenny and Fred said, the Browns are like one of the most famous families probably in the city. Is there like a pressure or like something, we got to keep this thing going? Or how's that feel to be a part of that tradition and keep it going?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think you certainly want to be respectful to what the city represents and reflect that, appropriately. I think, I don't know if it's pressure. I think that at all, really. I think, many of us have different jobs and doing different things, and I think there's a bias towards staying engaged, staying interested, understanding kind of the issues and the opportunities of the city, and figuring out ways in which we can help, like anybody would really, in our own individual ways, to help to find solutions and empower people and empower ideas. And I think that, frankly, there are so many people in this city in particular that are doing that every day. I mean, I work with Holly McKnight. Her husband, J.K. McKnight, has done a ton for this city through, his philanthropy and through his interest in music. And
he can throw a party, that's for sure.
He can throw a party. Great taste. So I think that, and there's like individual after individual like that are here, looking. I think because it's a city that's fairly manageable size, it gives individuals an opportunity to kind of make things happen that would be much harder to do even in a Nashville, certainly in a New York or Miami. But I think there's still an economy of scale that allows a good idea or a strong individual to make something powerful happen.
It's a big, small town.
Yeah.
So I also want to kind of just talk about your rise inside the ranks of Brown-Forman too, because a little bit of research shows that you had started off in the mailroom at Brown-Forman. So kind of talk about the steps that you took up the ladder to kind of where you are today.
Well, I mean, we've got a great internship. I mean, the internship program's gotten a whole lot better since I was a part of it. And that's how I got involved. I didn't know anything about really the business. I grew up in Montreal. I had a chance to move, spend a summer in Louisville. I got a job in the mailroom. I think, those types of opportunities in a mailroom give you a real perspective on who people are in a company, what different groups do, individuals do. You learn about the brands. I remember walking in to my cousin Mac Brown's office, and I think he was part of the Jose Garneau company at the time and was running maybe Martel. And just seeing the point of sale in his office and going, God, how do you get this job? This would be great. Look at that. I mean, just some neat stuff. And I think it's a business that kind of captures your imagination, and you see kind of neat things that you can touch and feel. And so that certainly gives you a nice kind of insight into how people get their jobs done. And it's a beautiful campus. If you've ever been down to Brown-Forman, it really is set up like a university campus, and it's a great place to work. And so that certainly draws you in. And then, I went and got a graduate degree and came back in '94 and started to work. Actually, you were talking on the intro about Sazerac. Mark Brown, who runs Sazerac, hired me at Brown-Forman when he was running the Advancing Markets Group. And so I began working in that, like our Emerging Markets Group in '94. I went to Chicago for a bit. I was supposed to be there for a couple years, and an opportunity opened up for me overseas, and I was asked to come back to Louisville to interview for the job, but they wouldn't tell me what the job was. And so I spent basically the better part of a day trying to figure out why I was in Louisville and what I was going to be, what job. And then I kind of figured it out. And as it turned out, they wanted me to go to India. And I think they were just nervous about telling me that while I was living in Chicago, thinking I might not come for the interview, just because it's such a far way to go, and it's a difficult market. It's not, when you're 24, 25 years old, and somebody says, "Hey, do you want to go to Australia?" Yes, I do. When do you want to go to India? It's such a foreign place, and you really don't have the same kind of immediate interest, frankly, in kind of moving up there and going to a country that big and that vast. And I ended up moving there. I was supposed to go there for 4 months. I ended up spending a year, and I left that place in tears. I absolutely loved it. It was one of the best experiences of my life. I got to travel all over the country, helping set up a joint venture where we were local bottling, Southern Comfort. So that was my first kind of introduction into a relationship with a brand that I had off and on for over a decade at the company. And it was just great. It was fantastic, great people, great food.
What was your favorite Indian food dish?
Chicken tikka masala.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I like saag
fan.
paneer.
Love the naan.
Yeah, naan bread, delicious. I mean, everything about it I loved. And then I moved to the Philippines to help set up a joint venture over there, also around the Southern Comfort brand, and was on my way to Thailand to be a country manager, and I got persuaded to go help open up an office in Istanbul in Turkey for a regional marketing office that we had there, and I went to do that, and I ended up staying in Turkey for 3.5 years before coming back to the U.S. As a U.S. brand manager for Southern Comfort.
You should have been the Dos Equis, world's most interesting man. It sounds like you've been just as many places as him.
Yeah, maybe like some nice locations, but not nearly the exotic experiences that guy had.
For sure.
Yeah.
And so what got you into the Old Forester category? Was it to the point where you said, I kind of want to move on, or was it the sale of Southern Comfort and you said, okay, I'm looking for a new home?
You know what? It was... I think we began to see some interesting things happening for Old Forester. We had a great brand team that was coming up with some pretty wonderful ideas that are now we're drinking the whole Whiskey Row concept. And there was an opportunity we finally got the approval to go build this distillery at the location we're at today. And we wanted to bring that story together a little bit, like, the story of a brand that's been around for almost 150 years, that's been in our family, in our company. That's kind of the business we started with was Old Forester, and bringing that story of our family, the business, and the community together. At that point, I had about 20 years experience, so, here's a person that actually, may have the, commercial sense to go lead this, and had the obvious, the right DNA to connect the dots on this 5-generation story. And so I was asked to kind of head up the building phase of this and the capital project, and then help lead the brand and tell the story of one of America's unique alcohol products, and it's really been a pleasure to be able to kind of have that role.
Let's go to the construction part of this first. I mean, first of all, from a business perspective, you got to be nuts to try and build a distillery in a dilapidated.
There's better places to do this, right?
I think this area burnt down 2 times.
I mean, what were you? Take us through that process of like.
What I loved, what makes me feel good is like smarter people than me made the decision to put it here. So, that location site was picked well before I started. I think it was. I mean, but that's what makes it so special.
True.
Here's a location that we actually, like our founder officed out of from whatever, 1882 to 1919, and we get to move back in here generations later. I mean, so that's a special thing that when you get a chance to take advantage of that, you do it. I feel like one of our core capabilities at the company is building wonderful home places that allow us to tell great brand stories while displaying a process. And we worked with some great partners here in town and out of town that, frankly, put together a proposition that was hard to say no to, and that, and frankly, as you get into these projects, you, like any kind of renovation or building, something happens all the time that you're not expecting. Certainly the fire being a big obvious one.
Tell us about that. Let's go there because what was it, 2014?
Yeah. Right when I started.
Right when you started. So 2014, fire, there's smoke all downtown Louisville. The news crews are here. I see it on the news. That's how I find out about it. How did you guys? Because it was
your tweet.
Through my tweets.
I'm here.
I'm a first responder, so I was the first.
That's right. I forgot. I came on the site and I was tweeting about it. I forgot about that. But what was that like for you? Where were you?
Yeah.
What was going through your head when the fire hit?
So I was in the office at 850 Dixie Highway, and I got a phone call from a buddy of mine in corporate development who had a friend down here, works for one of the law firms or one of the banks, I don't know, and he was looking out his window and called my colleague and said, "Look, I think your building's on fire." And so I got the phone call. I was like, "Look, I just got a call from a friend who says that the buildings downtown on Main Street are on fire. I don't know if it's the distillery or not, but you may want to check it out." And so I just, I had my computer up, and there was this live feed on, I think, Wave or one of WHAS, one of the stations off a helicopter, and I pulled it up, and for sure it was obvious that the block was on fire. Less obvious was it in our building or was it down the block? And you knew no matter what it was going to be a problem. And your first reaction was, it was shocking how violent the fire was, how much flame there was, the amount of smoke, the amount of water being thrown at it. It was a big time fire. It was like watching a movie almost, and you're kind of paralyzed. And I called Mike Beach, and Mike and his team were already down here. And Mike is the project manager who really is the guy that built this place, managed all the contractors and whatnot. And so we had our folks down here and kind of trying to understand it, and really you're thinking about safety. I mean, what happens if somebody is killed as they're trying to kind of put this fire out? And that they're taking the right precautions, but it was pretty devastating. My wife hears about it. We're later at night, we're at home, the thing's still burning. I begin to get a lot of phone calls just from friends, and they're trying to find out about it. It was pretty awful. And, we were already planning on the groundbreaking, right? Like what that ceremony was going to look like and everything else. And so that everything gets put on hold. And, fortunately there were no injuries. We're sitting in the building today. So look, it was a horrible thing when it happened.
Right.
It's now a chapter in a long story. and this whole block looks stunning, and so I think we're pretty fortunate, given.
But the work it took to get it there, because a lot of people would have just let it, kind of tear down the facade and start from scratch. You all invested the money to actually save the front,
Yep.
and hold the brick in. I mean, we had braces out here for months,
Yeah.
And you guys were trying to protect the integrity of the building as much as you could.
I mean, it was a dangerous construction site for a long time. I mean, even as you're trying to clean up the inside, there had been so much water put on the building site to extinguish everything that it just eroded the ground. It eroded all of the brick, and then things were loose. When you're up front on Main Street on this side, as we're trying to kind of dig through that and brace it all, things are kind of crumbling as it's happening, and we had to call in special engineers. It took a lot of time, a lot of smart minds looking at it, figuring out ways in which we could make it a safe environment to allow people to go back and work. And so we really just had, experts in there, and just very few at a time. And it just took a lot of time. And you kind of make these connections in the romance copy of what we do. We're in a business that we spend our time waiting around for stuff to get ready, and so you want to be quick, and you want to make decisive decisions, but you also want to make the correct decisions. And we took our time. I think we've got it right. This building, I think, is fascinating, the way that we've constructed it now, and it's a beautiful facility. I think, whether you're coming in here on a tour, or you're going to George's, or you're just here to, walk around Main Street, it's been done right. And, again, the fire is a chapter of a long story.
Where are we at right now in the chapter?
Yeah, I think this is that whole fun Renaissance chapter, right? It's the chapter you want to be writing, and we're thrilled with what's happening with the brand. Even in Kentucky, this brand has always been a great brand for the city and for the state, but to see it grow, and the rural parts of Kentucky embrace Old Forester in a way that I just never saw in my lifetime. It's fantastic. There's always been this core heartbeat of the brand here in town, and it's just kind of expanding there. And then you see what's happening in these other markets, and how people are responding to some of the whiskey, the innovation. It's exciting. I think there's a lot more to be written with the whole category, right? We're just scratching the surface as it relates to bourbon and American whiskeys outside of the U.S., and I think that's going to be really exciting and a lot of fun for us. I think innovation continues to kind of push the envelope of the category in a neat way. We've got bourbon in general. It's just it just can be consumed in so many fun different ways. I think it's really, really versatile. And
so you bring up the international markets, and this is a very crucial time in American whiskey history, because we haven't had this kind of export interest before, and now in addition to having that interest, we have some trade concerns where people are pressing tariffs, and I can't think of a company that's more vulnerable to tariffs than Brown-Forman.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the tough outcomes of this, is as this tariff thing's going on. We're an industry that's, in most cases, it's single source production, right? The inputs of this product are 100% American. And so it's an easy target for tariffs outside of the U.S. because it doesn't really impact any supply side stuff that would be occurring from a European market, for instance. Pretty much everything is for bourbon and American whiskeys are made in America. So it's isolated, and so it's the perfect target to be in the middle of a tariff war, unfortunately. And it's the timing couldn't, it's not great. It's not a huge deal for Old Forester. Obviously, we're a smaller brand that's got some nice momentum. But it's not. We don't have a huge footprint, a global footprint yet.
But Jack Daniel's, the sister brand that's in Tennessee, that's
correct.
It hits them hard.
It does. It does. Yeah.
So you're not going to think of any sort of long-term effects that Old Forester could have on this? I mean, is it because I'm sure you've had some sort of international expansion and thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so we actually have a really nice business that's got some great momentum in Australia, but that's not a tariff issue. We're in the UK, and that is more of a thing for us, but it's still a small brand that's being built in the on-premise, and Fred's right. I mean, this is really about the Woodfords and the Jack Daniels of the world, and that this has a real impact on those brands and how we go about resourcing and how we go about brand building in the European and Asian and Latin American markets. So, I'm not the best guy to talk about how that's impacting those brands, but it's obvious that
I do think that
you don't get the PDF every morning that says the arrow's going down.
I will say that if there's a brand within the Brown-Forman portfolio that would survive like a turf war with other countries, it would be Old Forester, because it is such funny, a powerful.
Yeah, there was an article. My brother lives in London, and there was an article that came out, and it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Okay, 5 things to do facing this tariff war on bourbon and American whiskey, and I think one of the points was make Jack Daniel's popsicles that'll last longer. So I think people are coming up with ways in which to survive this period of time.
I think we'll survive, although I've screamed about it enough for the past couple of years.
So I want to ask a question just about the Old Forester brand and kind of where you see it. You've probably heard of finishing beer using whiskey barrels, but a Michigan distillery is doing the opposite. They're using beer barrels to finish their whiskey. New Holland Spirits claims to be the first distillery to stout a whiskey. The folks at Rack House Whiskey Club heard that claim and had to visit the banks of Lake Michigan to check it out. It all began when New Holland Brewing launched in '97. Their Dragon's Milk beer is America's #1 selling bourbon barrel-aged stout. In 2005, they applied their expertise from brewing and began distilling. A beer barrel finished whiskey began production in 2012, and Rack House Whiskey Club is featuring it in their next box. The barrels come from Tennessee, get filled with Dragon's Milk beer twice, the mature bourbon is finished in those very same barrels. Rack House Whiskey Club is a Whiskey of the Month club on a mission to uncover the best flavors and stories from craft distillers across the U.S. Along with 2 bottles of hard-to-find whiskey, Rack House's boxes are full of cool merchandise that they ship out every 2 months to members in over 40 states. Go to rackhousewhiskeyclub.com to check it out and try a bottle of beer barrel bourbon and beer barrel rye. Use code PURSUIT for $25 off your first box. So I want to ask a question just about the Old Forester brand and kind of where you see it. Do you see it as an everyday category, premium category, and are you doing anything to kind of elevate it into a premium category?
Well, for sure. I think, look, it's a great question, and it's the one we wrestle with most regularly. Is one of the wonderful aspects of the brand. If you talk to anybody that's been drinking it for a while or that's familiar with it, it's so accessible. It's a great value bourbon, and I think that's something that is core to the brand's DNA. And so maintaining that accessibility, both in the flavor profile and the price point, it's part of how we look at brand building for Old Forester. So that's always going to be a thing. Now, recently, we've had some success with the introduction of Whiskey Row, which allows us to play in price points that are, attractive. These are $40 and above price points. There's a ton of consumer interest in those price points, and I think if you create a bourbon that's worth that price, or even considered a value at that price, it's a special place to be. So I think we'll always try to look for ways, even at $40 or $55, or even looking at birthday bourbon, which is basically $100 now. That's still a good value for a 12-year-old, highly allocated bourbon that is got a recommended sales price at $100. It's hard to find it for that, but no, I think that's part of what we look at in our strategy. So
I'll say that if we take a look at some of the releases of the last 2 or 3 years of what's really hit the mark in our community, Old Forester has been right there in the thick of it. The 2018 birthday bourbon is probably the best birthday bourbon of the past decade.
That's a bold statement.
I'll have to take your word for it.
It's fantastic.
we should have some. Where is that?
Which, by the way, he still owes me a bottle. But
Did I not get you
I think
that?
you never got me.
Oh yeah, you all of us a bottle. You all of
He
us
has
a
a
bottle.
baby.
But I mean, everybody really regarded the 2013 as one of the best.
Yeah, it was very good. And then the Old Forester 1920 is fantastic.
It's always good, yes.
And I look at I look at what has changed within your team, and I feel like Jackie, and
Our moral compass.
I feel like you've got somebody inside, who's doing a great job of selecting stuff for you. So what?
Yeah.
And I've also noticed that when you walk around here, this is probably the most diverse distillery in the state. You see more diversity, you see more women, more people of color here, and I applaud you for that. But talk us through your team and who's actually picking what's going into the bottle right now.
Yeah. So Chris Morris continues to be our master distiller and leads the innovation. Juan, who works at this distillery, he's a big part of making sure what's coming out of here tastes like what we've got at Brown-Forman Distillery, where the vast majority of Old Forester is made. Jackie's came on board, I think, about 3 years ago. Right when I came on board, she was one of the first people that kind of was on our radar screen, and the first person I think I hired as when I took over. And there's no question that she has had an impact on how we talk about these brands, how we present them, both in flavor and in kind of the copy and the positioning of them. She's allowed us to think differently about innovation. I think she's worked really well with Chris and helping kind of you've got these two individuals that are really good at what they do, that have, I think, fairly I think they just have they have very well refined palates.
Basically, what I'm hearing is Chris and Jackie go into a room and they're fighting over a barrel, and Jackie's winning the fights right now. Is that what you're saying?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say, I mean, if it did come down to a physical battle, I would put my money on Jackie. but I think that they work well together now. And Jackie, I mean, look, the birthday bourbon, how we're proofing some of this stuff. I mean, she's really the brains behind President's Choice. We are lucky to have her, and she's had a great impact.
Do you take a little bit of a Bill Samuels approach, or at least what he used to say is like, I don't mess with the whiskey? Do you let people kind of make the decisions on what's in the bottle, and you just kind of give your stamp?
Yeah. I'm a great consumer.
Yeah.
I'm proud of my being a good, long-time, responsible consumer. But I tell you, I mean, since I've been in this job, I've probably spent more time thinking about, my palate, and like, my biggest problem with being like a whiskey taster is that I just don't have the reference points. Like, I don't know what a scone
Welcome to the crowd
tastes like,
except for
right?
Fred.
So I can't.
Fred starts reviewing. We're like,
he's got
it's hard.
He's got his T-shirt on that says like "Got Marzipan."
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I've got a sense of what I like, but I mean, Jackie's Ican's the person
figuring out what consumers would like.
Yeah. And there's just people that are, it's in their DNA, and they've worked really, really hard to develop a palate that's responsive to liquids that they're tasting, and we've got some really good people at that do that here.
But there's a little bit of responsibility on your shoulders, because there's another bottling called President's Choice that kind of falls within your realm now. Kind of talk about that.
I'm more involved with that, but Jackie narrows it down to a point where it's hard to make a bad decision. You know,
Yeah.
it really is. And well, you were part of the first one. I mean, I've leaned into, you know, a lot of really good people.
I know.
to help
I
pick
picked
these
the
things
first
up.
one.
Yeah. Well, we all did.
We all. There was like a group.
I was certainly
for the-
looking around the room and looking at how people were responding. But I mean, it was interesting, you know. And look, I'm still learning, you know. Frankly, you don't want me going out there and, you know, you've got to understand where the barrels are and why those barrels would possibly taste different than another barrel. Certainly, as you kind of fluctuate the proofs around, you know, it's easier for me to kind of taste stuff that's below 110 proof and get a sense of you know, the character of that whiskey. But yeah, I mean, I'm not the whiskey. I'm not a distiller.
I want to talk a little bit about the culture of Brown-Forman. You know, so you have 3 really prominent, you know, arguably all 3 iconic American whiskeys in Jack Daniel's, Woodford Reserve, Old Forester. And it feels like within the company, it's a little bit like University of Kentucky versus University of Louisville. Like there's like a bit of a rivalry within the company. Do you see that, or are you too close where?
I think Fred's creating one.
I have never done that.
Yeah, no, I don't. Look, I mean, the one thing you recognize, if you're fortunate enough to have a brand in your portfolio that's Jack Daniel's or anything remotely close to that, it's a benefit. There's no doubt about it. You know, it in so many different ways, it's even hard to put into words.
Opens a lot of doors, I imagine.
It sure does. And
but they don't have a president's choice, Jack Daniels.
They do not.
You know, you can hang your hat on that.
They have
and we do.
They have a Sinatra though.
Yeah, they've got a great portfolio. I mean, Woodford's got a great portfolio.
Do you have to because Woodford does? You guys kind of share some barrels. You know, the warehouses. Do you ever have to fight for barrels, or do you already have everything kind of allocated to you within the company?
We have what we need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When will you be closer to like 100% of production here?
Never.
Yeah. You'll always have share a little still time at Shively.
Oh, for sure. I mean, that's. Yeah, I mean, we have the capacity to do about 100,000 cases here. The brand's already, you know, everything all included is over 200,000, I think, and so we're you know, and we're growing. So the majority will continue to come out of Shively.
Huh.
Another question I kind of bring up is the Statesman, right?
Yeah.
What kind of impact did Old Forester Statesman and aligning yourself to a movie kind of have it as an impact on the business?
Interesting question. Yeah, so that was a little bit out of left field, right? It's not, you know, if you look at how we've innovated or come out with products, it's been basically using our history to drive that. And we had a really unique shot that brands of this size, with the kind of awareness we have, would never get. And we jumped at it, and it basically, we took a brand that didn't really exist and we put it on the market and sold, close to 10,000 cases in under 12 months, and it was a huge impact for us. It got us new points of distribution. All of a sudden, we're in all these AMC movie theaters, and around the introduction of that film when it came out, and we were doing, some menu development in those places, and so we had a great partnership going with Total Wine. They got behind the product, and so it opens a bunch of doors. It allows you to talk. For one, it that movie itself has such a huge following around the world that I think it probably gave us an avenue into consumers that would never ever buy a bourbon or Old Forester for sure, but they love the movie and they see Eggsy and the cast drinking it, and they're like, well, geez, I got to try that. I wonder what that's all about. And so you're already kind of as a recruitment tool. It's wonderful. A market like Korea, where we're nowhere, we really don't have any product there. If it's there, it's come through duty free in some way, shape, or form. That's the number. Kingsman was the number one movie in the country historically. It's the biggest movie. It's their like Star Wars, and
That's weird. And can you explain?
I don't. I have no idea. No idea. But I mean, and so all of a sudden, our Korean market's calling us like, "Hey, we got to get some of this stuff." So we're like getting pallets of it and flying it off to Korea so that it's available in the market there. And and if you look on, I follow whatever Old Forester on Instagram, and so I'll see a lot of these Instagram posts from Asia.
Hashtag statesman.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the kind of.
Well, Campbell, from a historical perspective, that was very big for bourbon. Like I'm glad to hear that it was a success for you. But from a category perspective, if you look back to the 1960s, James Bond really started dictating what a lot of people would drink from a spirits perspective. You would start seeing people go to white spirits over brown spirits, in large part because he wanted a martini shaken but not stirred. And so to see bourbon to continue to have this pop culture presence in Mad Men, Boardwalk Empire, The Statesman, that's a huge play for continuing to capture consumers. Yeah. So do you have a strategy, to do more than just The Statesman? I mean, are we going to start seeing you in some TV series or anything like that?
I mean, look, our strategy is like be lucky, and so
if they approach us about it, yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously. So there's a show that just started, I think, on Amazon called The Romanoffs, and so they reached out to us, and they needed a period type of a decanter. So we grabbed them one of our old holiday decanters, and they use that in the TV show. I have not seen the show, but I mean, you're always getting these types of opportunities. This movie came out recently called Like Father. It was like a huge hit on Netflix. And that movie has Old Forester in it and Woodford Reserve in it, and that was something that just came around because, somebody knew somebody, and they needed some bourbons for this scene, and turned out that movie did really, really well on that Netflix platform. So a lot of people saw it, and I think you look for opportunities to do that all the time. It's a great tool. It's fairly inexpensive, and it gives you a huge audience if it turns out to be a hit show or a hit movie.
All right, so are you a movie buff by any means?
I like movies.
So if you were to do a movie tie-in and have Old Forester be in anything, what would it be, past or present?
Oh, gosh. Oh,
that's a good question.
Man.
I mean, you already said Star Wars, so I don't think Luke could be sitting there. Oh, Fred said Star Wars? Okay.
No, Campbell did.
It's tough because the movies I like are a little darker, and so you don't always want your product featured.
It's like Saw 3.
Oh, no, wait, now. What kind of darkness are we talking about?
Like Unforgiven. Love that movie. But pretty dark. And so that's a tough one. I think it. To me, Jack Daniels is the example of great products showing up in great scenes of great movies that are unforgettable. I mean, whether it's Animal House or any Paul Newman film. I mean, that Jack Daniels is by these heroes and villains by their sides, and it becomes part of the character. And so I think that's what's important. That if you're going to, we're with Matthew Vaughn and Kingsman, I mean, he really built a big portion of his movie around the idea of distillers from Kentucky. And that's pretty spectacular. I mean, each of his characters were, had a very specific trait, and they were, associated with a particular style or a whiskey or a tequila or whatever it was. And it made sense. I mean, the story, when we got into how we got to Old Forester is that he actually referenced, as he was kind of giving us the short shtick on it, that look, this is like 1919 pre-prohibition, and he goes on and so he finishes telling me the story, and I was like, hey, look, you mentioned pre-prohibition. Is that why would you know about that? He's like, well, I just need something. If the agency was started in 1919, Kingsman, right, on the heels of the First World War. That would have been around 1919, so it would have been pre-prohibition. So I think you need to have this. Well, look, the brand you want to do it with then is Old Forester. We're the only brand that's been around before, during, and after Prohibition. He's like, you're right, I'm going to do it with Old Forester. And so it just fit his story, and I think that's when these things work well.
And is something like that, I mean, do you have to how does it work? Are they paying you a royalty, or are you paying kind of like a?
Can't get in any of that stuff.
He's looking a way to expand the ascot business.
That would be great.
Working on plug.
By the way,
should be all over.
Kingsman did their main the guy who plays the Big Lebowski. What's his name?
I just know the
Jeff
Big
Bridges.
Lebowski.
Yeah,
Jeff Bridges.
Jeff Bridges. He wore an ascot in the film.
He was here for Derby. He's like, "Where's Fred Minnick? This guy I've heard about with the ascots."
Because you said there's only 3 people in the world that still wear them, and so now we got 2 of them.
Well,
got to find that third.
Yeah. The other guy is some random winemaker in France.
And so there's kind of like one last question that we got to do, and just part as a service of this is, you'd mentioned the history of this building and being able to be at the place where George had his own office and stuff like that.
We were actually sitting in his office.
Oh, okay.
wow.
You see that photo right there? That's him and
With the
sitting back
dehydrator?
there that's him sitting back there leaning in the chair.
Oh, that's
And
amazing.
those
That's
are
real
those
cool.
Windows right
So is
there,
that a Samsung or an iPhone?
That's an iPhone.
It's an
No, you know what? I think it's a Canadian. It's the BlackBerry.
Yes. The Pony Express.
Yeah.
But how? Because I guess we everybody kind of wants to know is either, I'm sure you've looked it up in the family tree, like how far away you're moved from the gene pool of George himself,
Well, I'm
George Garvin,
5th generation.
5th generation. So is he your great
Great-great-grandfather.
Okay.
Yeah. Now the funny thing is that my
Kenny's
dad,
going to want a swab of your cheek later.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of
Ancestry.com.
DNA testing
We're
going
gonna
around
check
right
this.
now. So
Yeah, we're gonna have to 23andMe this after we're done.
So my dad was George Garvin Brown III. I was born in '67. My grandfather, George Garvin Brown II, passed away in, I think, '69. And so my brother was born in July of '69, and he was named George Garvin Brown IV. So you can imagine, as the eldest child, how come I didn't get...
Why Campbell?
Where did Campbell... How come I don't get the Roman numeral, And so obviously the reason is that I think it's a little distracting when you've got 3 Garvins running around the same kind of household. And my grandfather just passed away, and my mom and my dad had my brother, and so that was a nice tribute to him. Mm-hmm. So he's my great-great-grandfather.
Real cool.
Very cool.
Yeah, definitely a good story. And I want to say also thank you again for taking the opportunity and time to come on the show and tell us your story, the history, more about Statesman. I think it was
Your favorite movie,
Yeah.
Unforgiven. We
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, so
Love that movie.
Yeah, so send him some
thank
AMC
you.
movie tickets, and he'll go watch
Yeah.
a deep dark mystery movie or something.
I would like to say that I think Old Forester would fit very nicely in The Hustler, which was actually centered around a lot of bourbon.
Yeah, it wasn't he? He was a wholesaler.
Yeah.
He was a wholesale. Paul Newman was a wholesaler.
And he was like a big. He came down to Kentucky for
Yeah,
a billiards
that's right.
tournament, and
Yeah.
he ended up getting hammered on JTS Brown, 8-year-old, and it was 8-year-old bourbon that drew him in. So it's
See, I was
Old
thinking,
Forester
like-
would have fit there.
I was thinking like Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump would be a perfect fit.
Yeah.
No, that Lieutenant Dan needed rot gut stuff.
Yeah.
He didn't want anything of quality. He just wanted to get hammered.
Very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do I know?
I would just say like something like Jurassic Park, just like running through the fields with a bottle of Old Forester in your hand,
Like
or
a
something.
T-Rex drinking some.
Yeah.
Something like that. You got
I
short
don't know.
arms.
I
They got
don't
short
know
arms.
at an amusement park if that's really appropriate. Well, thank you. This is a lot of fun. I appreciate you guys having me
It's
on.
always a pleasure.
Absolutely. And, if people want to learn more about you, they can Google it. Apparently, they're, get in the Wikipedia and fix all the stuff that I was getting incorrect. at
I'm
the very
surprised there's anything on me in Wikipedia.
You'd be surprised.
Most of
Dante.
it's good.
Yeah.
Most of it.
90%.
Yeah. But make sure you follow. Actually, you should come to the Old Forester Distillery, distilling
Yes,
company here
beautiful place
downtown. Go and take a tour. It's a great experience. They've got literally everything here. They've got bottling. They've got cooperage. They've got distilling. They've got a barrel warehouse. You name it.
It's the only
They salvage
distillery,
it all.
And
I
the-
know of. You can see a barrel
Yeah.
get lit on fire. It's pretty
It's the coolest elevator experience you'll ever see. There's an elevator here at the Old Forester Distillery that I would say rivals something at Disney. it's a fantastic elevator ride.
I was about to say Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, something like that. I was going to rival that one too.
I haven't seen that in a while.
I mean, it goes up, it goes
Maybe
down,
Old
it goes
Forester
left,
goes in
right.
there. They can have like a Charlie Chocolate Factory bourbon ball with Old Forester.
Now we're thinking. So make sure you go, you check that out. Follow Bourbon Pursuit as well as Fred Minnick on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And also, if you haven't done so yet, subscribe to Bourbon Plus because there's a lot of great news stories that come out through there.
Great magazine.
Thank you, guys.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
It's just great imagery and everything like that. But if you also like what you hear, support the show, patreon.com/Bourbon Pursuit, because without you, the show, it would be very tough to keep going. So we want to say thank you for everybody that helps support the show to do that, as well as all the questions. I mean, some of the questions we asked today were actually from some of the Patreon supporters out there today.
Yeah, all the show suggestions, questions, feedback, we listen to you all, and we ask. So we really appreciate everyone listening, and keep those coming. And Fred, good to see you, man. And
Always
Campbell,
a pleasure.
Good to see you. Thank you.
So we'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.